Welcome to SportH.E, the podcast that brings you insights and learning from the best in the business. I'm Ben O'Connell, and in each episode we'll hear about both the successes and the challenges of our guests as they've sought to grow, develop and improve. In sharing these stories, we hope to inspire and inform the development of sport across universities in the UK and contribute to the growth of one of the best sporting ecosystems for young people in the world. In this episode, I'm joined by Stu Fowlie, Chief Operating Officer at Scottish Student Sport. Stu recently celebrated his 20-year anniversary with SSS, and so this episode is full of rich examples from someone with a career well lived. Alongside his experiences across UK sport, we also get the opportunity to dive into the World University Games, where Stu has led the Team GB delegation across the globe on numerous occasions.
It's the second biggest multi-sport event in the world behind the Olympics. 15 core sports, 3 optional ones every 2 years. Best part of 10,000 athletes from upwards of 150 countries worldwide. I've tried to be the same Stu if I'm in a performance environment than I am in any other environment, and to give other people, try to give other people the comfort to do the same, and not to have to pull a mask on because we're in a certain place. My reflection is that most people respond really well to that. Folk who are already in the habit of having a mask on, that can be quite uncomfortable for them.
Remember, you can check out my reflections from this episode and all of my other guests at benoconnell.co.uk. Trigger warning. In this episode, Stu shares a sensitive experience in relation to suicide. If you or someone you know has been impacted by suicide, you may wish to skip this part, which starts at 55 minutes and 30 seconds. Let's get to it then. It's time to welcome Stu Fowlie. Welcome to SportH.E, Stu. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well, thanks, Ben. And yourself?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. It's a bit of an overcast day today, but the spirits are high because I'm getting to chat to you for the next hour, so looking forward to it.
That's it. Take the weather with you.
Absolutely. Right, so let's get stuck in today's conversation. So we're going to start with a different question. I've not asked this one to many guests yet. So can you take us back to your earliest memory in sport? What is it and why does it stick out?
What a powerful question to start with, Ben. I was really lucky to be in a supportive environment at home from an early age, and have always been the youngest of 3 brothers. And so whilst it's not exactly sport, my early memories are things like learning to ride a bike. I can still remember my dad was in the Air Force and we were in a sort of old and largely unused base, which had miles of tarmac, so it was perfect for learning to ride a bike. And I can remember Dad coming back from wherever he was to see me ploughing my way up the street. So that was a nice, and we used to do other things with the boys as we were, like going to the beach for long jump contests or kicking a ball around in the park. So I think that was the first seed really of not just enjoying activity and being outside, but also youngest brother, Ben, you've got to get wired in or you're doomed,
Absolutely. Well, that airport hangar sounds like a child's dream.
Oh, magical stuff, yeah. And you take that sort of thing for granted. Of course, it's a massive privilege, but I think the love of being active and trying to achieve stuff with a small a was there quite early on.
Yeah. And beat your brother.
Well, 2 brothers.
Oh, two brothers
to beat, yeah. And that, of course, that's a lifetime's work. You're never finished with that one.
Absolutely. Right. So then, talk us through your professional career. So how did you get into the sport industry and what led you to becoming Chief Operating Officer at Scottish Student Sport?
This is where you need the shepherd's crook, right, when I get into volume 3. But in brief, really enjoyed the student sport experience at Edinburgh in the late 1990s. I know people say this stuff offhand. I absolutely would not have completed my degree were it not for the kind of sticky Velcro effect of playing sport. And it did. So I look back on uni as 7 happy seasons, really. That's my uni experience. And the last of those was in as sports union president at Edinburgh. So that was the kind of realization of quite a long period of organising stuff as well as taking part. And then I got really lucky after that, Ben. Well, I was probably lucky already, but As it happened, in my sabbatical year, two major things were going on that were impactful on me. One was that Edinburgh hosted the British University Games, and a plucky young O'Connell would have been in that only 3 years later. So we were hosting that, which was cool because I was playing for the football squad and helping to organise the games. And the other thing that was happening was that we were just trying to design a new organisation in Scotland, which at that time was going to be called Scottish University Sport and was to start with. And so I was lucky to be on a working group that was helping figure that out and position it and design it. And both of those things, I suppose, helped me get my first job, which was actually in London and what was then BUSA. And by the time I was fed up with London, Ben, which didn't take too long, a couple of years, then the organisation we'd been trying to design was ready to go. And I was just really fortunate to be the first employee at SUS when it kicked in 2005. And suddenly that's 20 years ago. So we can fill in some of the blanks, but I've been happily engaged in that endeavour ever since. We've had some changes along the way that we'll probably get into, but it's been such a privilege to be involved. And the main thing I reflect on is the good fortune of being in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, so lots to get into in that. And wherever I speak to about Stu Fowlie, they will say, that it's the passion that kind of exudes, out from you. And I think, having worked for what is now SSS, for always say a decent chunk of time, I think it's that undimmed passion that comes across from probably the day you started to 20 years later. So it's great. It's great to see that. And I have as you mentioned, I have fond memories of the British University Games. I have to caveat that I never made it as a player, but managed to get there as a coach. But it was a great experience. And so what was when you worked for what was BUSA, now Bucks, what was your role down in London?
Yeah, well, this was a lifetime ago, Ben. So imagine, dear listener, the national organisation having 12 staff in an even smaller office in London on Union Street. And I think in the engine room of that staff cohort were sports programme managers. In fact, there were sports administrators to start with, but effectively, as a youngster, I had 9 sports to look after from top to toe. You'd have your hand in anything that was going on in those sports. So what a brilliant place to cut your chops, So the delights of equestrian one day and clay pigeon the next, and football and surfing, and there was so much variety. And because it was a small team, you just had to get stuck in, So that was my job at BUSA. I was happy days.
And when you think back to that time, are there any things you learnt in that sort of formative stage of your career that sort of, you've carried with you throughout?
Loads of lessons, Ben. Like, don't assume things. This is it sounds like fanciful nonsense, but it's true. I came back from lunch on my first day at BUSA, and I had a post-it note on my desk. Could I ring? Bear in mind, I was looking after the GGs, the equestrian. Could I ring Miss E. Quine about the equestrian entries? So I'm like, come on, guys. I know I'm a bit green, but seriously. But in fact, that was the president of the horse riding club at the University of Surrey. So you've got to take everything, on its merits. But I learned a load from colleagues in that job, and to see how to operate at scale, but with small resource, has been such a valuable thing that, there's always a way to get things done. I think I learned a lot about communicating with people. You would get absolutely peppered on the phone. I think there's more email now than phone calls probably in the office, but we used to get absolutely battered on the phone, and sometimes you wouldn't enjoy that, but actually you're exposed to all kinds of people. you'd get directors of sport. This probably still happens, Ben. You must confess if this is you. You'd get directors of sport phoning you up about like a second team football fixture just because that's what they cared about at the time. So you'd have to learn to hold your own and or ameliorate the situation with sometimes senior colleagues. But the main lesson really was from watching others with more experience than me, how they organised themselves, how they managed their time, how they supported one another in a work environment. And that stuff's universal and still useful today.
Yeah. And so making that jump, then moving down to London, relocating, was there, trepidation at the time? Do you remember, how you felt?
It was an interesting moment. I'd confidently put an application in to this vacancy and then gone on holiday. And the gay abandon of a young person. So as it happened, I was away when the interviews were supposed to be on, and this almost turned into a problem because I had been noted as having accepted an interview, which was a clerical error because I was in Venice at the time. So I came back from Venice, landed at the airport to about 15 messages from the BUSA office, wondering where I was from 2 days prior. So anyway, we figured out what had gone wrong, and we agreed that I could be at the office in 2 hours for an interview that day. So I just went straight from the airport. I still had my board shorts on and whatever, which was actually perfect for me because, I don't like to plan things too much. So there wasn't my long-winded answer to your perfectly fair question, Ben. There wasn't much time for trepidation. Was offered the job at that time. My girlfriend was just starting a role in Derbyshire, so she was off to Repton School, and I was off to London, and it just seemed like that could work. So we just got stuck in.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so let's circle back then. So tell us about Scottish Student Sport, SSS as it's known. What does the organisation do and what's its role in Scottish sport?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So there's basically 3 areas to our work, and I'm sure the listeners will latch onto these pretty quickly. We've got an advocacy function. Sport and education are both devolved in Scotland, as people will appreciate. So we've got a function 2 ways, really. One is to remind leaders in tertiary education that sport and active well-being are actually important. And the other is to remind partners in sport that colleges and unis exist and it's actually an important population. So we're very deliberate about trying to hold that middle ground between sport and tertiary education and try and stitch it together a bit better. So that's all advocacy work for us. The second area of the business is development, which is code for all sorts of governing body partnerships, for project work that we might do around important areas like inclusion, for instance, or mental health, but also some more direct work around coaching or volunteering or developing new officials. And of course, we have a networking function in the middle of all of that. So we run conference events and webinars, and we have communities of interest. So there's a whole load of stuff in that development bucket. And then naturally, there's a load of inter-student sports competition that goes on. So comps is our third area, and that's about 100 events a year. So, occasionally folks say, what do you need SSS for if you've got bucks? And the easiest thing to say, the quick answer is, well, we're running 100 events of our own on top of what you might get elsewhere in the country. So we're active in about 30 sports, give or take, annually. And there's a whole load of effort that goes into that. We also try to add a bit of value to the Bucks Scottish Conference fixtures where we can. And we still run national squads in a handful of sports, although that's maybe a bit more complicated than it was when you and I were on the team staff in Swansea 06. So that's pretty much it. And then there's the surrounding cuddle for all that, which is just to run the business well and be a strong organisation. And, so we're mindful we'll have to use our resources carefully. So hopefully that's a quick intro to the life of SSS.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I'd like to just, I guess I've always been intrigued, and you've explained it pretty well there. But so before Triple S, the competitions that existed in Scotland were only the ones that were offered through Bucks, or there wasn't any at that point. Or yeah, just talk us through
No,
how that developed.
so we're on the shoulders of giants with that. So you can trace it back to at least well, in some cases over 100 years. Some of our events have been going, our golf championships, our Queen's Park Shield in men's football, and some others. So the difference was that traditionally that was all very federalised, exclusively volunteer delivered. And so much like BUSA and UCS became Bucks, we used to have a network for the professional staff in Scotland, which was called SUPIA, and we had the Scottish Uni Sports Federation. But they didn't really have dedicated and long-standing staff. It was two organisations, the funding was poor. And so these were the things we were trying to address in that working group of '03 to try and tie it all together, which we did. And the colleges is the other distinctive feature. We started doing work with colleges in Scotland in about 2009 with some funding support, and then like formally folded all of that into Triple S in 2011. So anyway, I'm not even answering your question now, but there's a good heritage, at least on the university side, of that sports competition. We've just tried to professionalise that, make it a bit more robust, and then broaden our sights a wee bit ever since we got started.
And so how many member institutions are members of Triple S?
We're on 32, I think. Don't quote me if I'm one out. It's a moving picture, but we've got not quite universal coverage of all of tertiary ed in Scotland, but we're very close. Almost all of the colleges are now in membership, which is terrific. We haven't quite cracked it with the Open University, but likewise with Glasgow School of Art have come and gone a little bit. The Conservatoire has come and gone a little bit. So we still need to kind of refine our model for the more esoteric or dedicated institutions that have a different model. But we've got about 92% of all the students in Scotland, one way or the other. And it's almost 50-50 unis and colleges. That's probably the easy way for the listeners to think about it.
And so then, how do you find? We talk in the Bucks world around 160 plus members. How do you then find an approach working, cohering, trying to align? The work of those institutions that will be very vastly different within Scotland. What's anything you've learned along the way?
Probably learned by loads of mistakes and trial and error. I think it's an ongoing challenge for both Triple S and Bucks as to how to be of value to what is such a disparate group of institutions. We've got a massive advantage by being a bit smaller. You can just about conjure with 30 to 35 members. I don't envy, in this respect, Will and his team trying to look after 5 times as many. But still, there are significantly different challenges if you happen to be at New College, Lanarkshire, or you happen to be at the University of Aberdeen, and that's just an ongoing challenge, Ben. I think what I try to hold on to is that we first and foremost have to listen well, and then we have to do our best to add value where we can, and we'll have to try and be clear with folk when we can't, or we think it's like you can do anything you want, but you can't do everything you want. So we have to be quite clear with people. I think as long as you give that clarity of why you will or won't try to help, then folk can move on and find another way.
Yeah. So we mentioned before, but you've been at Triple S now for, I think I saw it announced on socials recently that you celebrated, 20 years there. So looking back across that time, what are some of the things that you're most proud of?
There's a few different strands. Most of our work, in my opinion, Ben, is it's a steady progression. It's not like one day you're doomed and the next day you've won the lottery. And, all the fireworks go off. So, there've been a few significant moments I would point out. I think the college evolution is a critical one, and it's been really nice to see our work then being recognised and backed with some more national money. So the Active Campus Network was of our creation and has been funded the last 2.5 years through lottery money. And that's brought staff onto college campuses for the first time with a remit of getting people active. So that's been terrific. It just shows you sometimes it's not like the wrong idea, just the wrong time. We first suggested such a thing certainly in the first decade of this millennium, and it just took a wee while. So, but that's been encouraging. If you zoom out from that, though, we started counting activity on behalf of the network in 2003, and the level of activity has gone up every year since then, except 2021 for obvious reasons. But we're still well past where we were pre-COVID, and that shows no immediate signs of slowing down. So through some trick, and despite challenging climates and resources, there's just so much appetite for activity, Ben. And our job is just to try and foster that where we can. I think we've made some big strides in that time about it sounds a bit philosophical, but what is the conversation about? What are we collectively trying to do? And I think when I was at uni in the 90s, it was very much get the best, 10 or 15 folk you can and win a fixture on a Wednesday. That was the focus. And of course, that still matters. But the conversation now is so much richer. It's about physical, mental, and social health. It's about belonging. It's about attainment and recruitment. It's about a sense of place in the world. It's about partnerships. So I would just pause there and think about the richness of conversation and the sense of purpose that people now have. And that's reflected everywhere. The role of a sports president now, to me, is a nice marker here for how things have changed. And there's still something in common with the job I did in 2002-3, but it's a much bigger, much more important role now than it was then.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great point and very eloquently put around the richness of the conversation. And for somebody then that has lived that journey as well, it must be incredible to see. And I'm fortunate to have a number of conversations with guests on this podcast around how student sport isn't what there's maybe an outside perception of student sport being around. It is just a couple of guys, girls getting together, playing a game, and then and celebrating in the evening. It is now it's everything else that goes around that. And I think as an industry, we are maybe, my perception would be that we still struggle to kind of sell that richness. And that there's a default position of it, it's just student sport, and I think it is. Yeah, you and I could hopefully both attest that it's it's so much more than that now.
It definitely is. And I think we still, and it's because we're so interested in getting stuff done that it's difficult to siphon off enough time and effort to tell the story and prove it and so on. So we're all a wee bit guilty of that. But I do think, in terms of the positioning of student sport within Scotland, and the same is true in the UK, we're much better placed than we've ever been, Ben, to actually contribute across both sport and education. It was a difficult budget just a couple of weeks ago, particularly on the education front in Scotland, but there's a little bit more resource happily coming into sport, and it's been really encouraging that for the first time we're not having to really elbow our way in to get a seat at the table to be shaping what that does and what it's for. We're being invited in, and that's a subtle distinction, and it doesn't mean we're suddenly going to be rich, but I think it's a nice marker for the role that we can play collectively, to get others to appreciate the importance of what we do, which we all know and see every day.
Yeah, no, again, I think that's really important, and I think saw in the news recently about, and you can hopefully tell us a bit more about it. But an increase in funding announced for the sports sector by the Scottish government, and that was as a result of what I perceived again from the outside, looking at governing bodies, universities coming together and making a collective pitch to government to say, look, things need to get better here. And I think it is a really important marker that, as you say, it wasn't yourselves and others shouting over saying, oh, we need to be in that conversation, if you're actually invited in. So tell us a bit more about how that came about and what that process was like.
Yeah, there's good, and sometimes you don't know the payoff. You have to just faithfully keep making the argument and keep showing up, and I hope keep making a positive case more so than a negative one. The campaigning that happened, there was a running on empty campaign, particularly in the last 6 months. It was the first time sports maybe been brave enough to actually kick off a wee bit, because I think we're used to being the good guys, the good news bureau, and we can find a way and we're positively minded. But sometimes the counterfactual is important as well. Don't back this at your peril, because here are the consequences. So, I think good messaging there, but also just good timing. The Scottish government had pledged to make a big budget uplift at the start of the current session of Parliament, so 4 years ago, and this was kind of last chance saloon for them to follow through on some of that. So that pressure helped as well, and naturally the Commonwealth Games and more recently the World Cup success for the men's team. But that's all helped as well. And some of the money that was announced 2 weeks ago is specifically for this summer to try and catch that wave. And I hope that some of that activity will land on a campus, particularly to think about transition. So people who are leaving school, let's say in May or June or July, and might be going to college or uni in August or September, can we use the summer to get them onto our campuses and make them feel comfortable about that transition point? So hopefully more to come on that, Ben.
Yeah, great. And if you could just a couple of minutes on, then just tell me more about the college program then, because again, I've seen that's something slightly different that's now kind of kicked off in Scotland. So what does that look? Is it a competition structure? Is it interventions? What's the sort of work you're doing in that space?
Yeah, so it's called the Active Campus Network, and at the heart of it, it's really about getting more pockets of activity of any kind into college campuses. Such a diverse environment, Ben. People know exactly what a school is, and most folk understand what a uni is, but a college is something completely different, really. And so you've got an incredibly diverse group of people in institutions that are firmly anchored at the heart of their communities. And so the ingredients for getting stuff done are different, but really exciting. The roles of the coordinators are to simply engage with that population and find out what they would like to do and find the best way of delivering it. So we've had all sorts. We've got lunchtime activities going on. We've got emergent sports clubs. We have partnerships with other local providers. We've had a huge boon in disability sport for additional support needs students, playing bocce, but also doing all sorts of other stuff. And it's been a great place to just try stuff. Floor curling's been a big hit. There's quite a bit of pickleball going on. So most of that is still, it's organised but informal, Ben. But what we're also starting to see is a bit more throughput into Triple S and Bucks competition. And some of the clubs in the more mainstream activities are starting to think, well, it's all right having a club session, but we want to go and play somebody else, So we've got this wonderful problem now, Ben, which is when people realise that they now need kit and buses and time off class and all of that good stuff, and actually some other deliverers besides our coordinators. I pause there because they're not really ours, but we think of them as ours. We're not paid for them, but they're still in our team. So it's a nice moment just now, and the funding goes only to 2027 at the moment, but the conversation is, how do we make this a long-term commitment, and how do we just make it a staple within Scotland the same way that Active Schools has been for the last 20 years or so. So it's an exciting time.
Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing that with us. So going back to the 20 years that you've been at Triple S, from the formation to where it is now, I'm sure that the organisation has been through some changes, possibly some by design, some due to, you touched on before, some of those external factors. Interested to know, how have you approached these challenges, and what to you does good change look like?
Yeah, it's a really stimulating question, because in a way, lots of things have changed, and in a way, they haven't at all. I think the principles we're trying to work to have been pretty immune to any moves. Notwithstanding the earlier point about the richness of the conversation, but our purpose as a convening power and a members organisation that wants to help people get active for all the benefits that can bring, that's pretty immutable. And I think that'll still be the case in another 20 years' time. The role of the national bit at the middle, I sometimes refer to that as, if we're making bread, then Triple S is just the yeast. It's just a wee bit of us somewhere in that recipe to help the whole thing grow and take on a good shape. But actually, most of the other ingredients, they belong to the campuses, they belong to the unis and colleges. And so, anyway, I'm digressing here a little bit, but I think our role is simply that. It's that little added ingredient to try and improve things as we go. Last year was a bit painful because we lost some chunky public money from the Scottish Funding Council. We're still friends with them, by the way, and I'm looking forward to them coming back in at some point with the checkbook. There's a clue in their title, after all. But we did have to make some painful changes last year, which was a sore one, really, especially when you've got very capable and valued colleagues. But I think the skill in that change management is to be really open with the people, actually. The business always finds a way. I'm not worried about the business or the overall purpose of what we're all trying to do, but the big impact's on the human beings. And so that was my focus last year, was to just give them as much information, as much openness as possible. And I think it's okay to inhabit two spaces, to say, I have decided that we're going to make a change that affects you directly and badly, and B, you're valued. I care what happens to you next. I want to help you on your journey and all that stuff. So that's what we tried to do. Get them on the show to find out whether it worked or not.
Yeah, and if it's useful just to reflect two things back to you, things that have come across my desk probably in the last year, a few weeks that have been living in my head rent free, is two ideas. So one is that, and you talked about it earlier, but this idea that if you take the acronym of a leader or a chief executive officer, that kind of CEO, I heard someone say recently that you should replace the E for an R, and it should be a chief repeating officer. And I really like, you've attested to that, haven't you? It's about that consistent messaging, and just continuing in the good times and the bad times, to keep focusing on, this is what we do, this is why we're here, these are our values, this is our purpose. And even when it's really difficult and there can be some really strong headwinds, to be able to keep repeating that message is really, really important.
I think so. I heard a good bit of content recently on a podcast, and it was about the difference. It was rooted in game theory, not game theory, but research around how humans work in groups and how that expresses in games. But the point of the example was the difference between a goal and a purpose, and goals change all the time. We would go and have a game of basketball, and the goal is to score more points than the other team, but that's not the purpose. That's not why we're there to play basketball. It's not really what it's about. And so I'm trying to link this back to your point. I think the goals shift all the time, and they're defined by what resource you have, what's in front of you, and so on. But I think the more time we can spend remembering what the purpose is, then the better we are. And we've got to be humble enough, as all of us as staff, that there was no staff at all when the Queen's Park Shield was first contested in 1921 or whatever it was. Folk found a way to get it done. They'll find a way to get it done in 3021, whether we're here or not. So, zoom out a little bit, and some business interruption is not fun. I wouldn't have chosen it, and I hope we'll bounce back, but it doesn't really hold a candle to what our purpose is, and we've just got to keep that in mind.
I'm really sorry to interrupt, but I'd like to borrow your attention for just 30 seconds. I've loved getting to record these episodes, and if you haven't already done so, it would be great if you could click the subscribe button wherever you are watching or listening. This really helps me to continue bringing you great guests and develop the podcast. This all started by asking the question, what does good look like in HE sport? And with your help, I can continue sharing my journey and bringing you more brilliant insights. Now that's enough for me. Let's get back to the episode. So looking to the future then. So what are some of the big ticket items that you're currently working on and hoping to deliver in the next kind of 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, well, I think one thing is, notwithstanding everything I've just said, there's a bit of just get it done under a new model. So we're one semester into a new way of working. I think it's been moderately successful. I've got my eyes peeled because I don't want our small team to burst at the seams, and we'll have to keep reflecting on whether the new business model is actually working. So there's a bit of just running the business. That's fine. We're only really looking 2 years ahead strategically, and that's on purpose, because we hope that things can. What we didn't want to do is set out too conservative a stall for too long, and we're optimistic that we can do a bit better from 2027 onwards. So much of my time in between now and summer 27 is to sow the seeds for that future model. That means it's really important to position tertiary ed in sport. It means it's really important to take advantage of any new funding that comes along. We've got to stay visible and relevant, both to sport and education. The college's work is one strand of that, and we're in working groups now to try and figure out that future model and get some sustainable funding in behind that. So there's plenty to be getting on with, I think, Ben. But it shouldn't be a footnote that our major purpose is that we're a members organisation, and we need to add value to what people are doing on campus. So I always think, I trust we're doing okay. If somebody says we're not, then they're right and I'm wrong, and we need to listen to what our members are saying. So that's part of my concern about the model we have now, is that we can make a few adjustments, but what we mustn't dial down is our ability or our willingness to actually engage with our members and listen to what they want.
Another thing that I heard recently, and again, this was a CEO that was talking, and I'm just interested to know your thoughts on the reflection between this and being a membership organisation. The point he was making, his role wasn't to be the aggregator of everybody's opinions or the aggregator of the average view. It was absolutely to listen, but there were times when he just got to make a decision based on what he felt was the best way forward. So I'm interested, your reflections on that, and maybe the unique setup of SSS as a membership organisation.
I see that playing out all the time. Just listening to you say that makes me think of actually IAs in the Bucks world, our administrative colleagues who are at the crosshairs of all the fixtures every week, because they have this job. They have to absorb all kinds of demands, complaints, opinions, and so on from their student clubs, and then choose what to do with that information. And sometimes the right thing to do is to completely represent that out to opponents or up to Triple S and Bucks. And sometimes the right thing to do is to acknowledge that and conclude that it's inappropriate, or that's not what we're going to do, folks, and here's why. And I think the core ingredient in both of those decisions is like a clarity of purpose and a clarity of communication either way. So I think that's the important thing. Let me relate that back to my job. Sometimes it's our job to actually point out to some people why there's another view in play, and and to simply explain that that's a position we have to hold. A lot of the decisions aren't very easy because it's difficult to know where the critical mass is, or which side of the argument there are more people on. And I guess we just have to keep wrestling with that all the time. You get a feel for it, I think, the longer you're involved, but the pitfall to that is assuming that you know when you don't really. So I think there's quite a lot of skill in there, Ben. I don't know if I possess enough of it, but that's what we try to do. And I think I'm maybe rehashing a point here, but I think it's absolutely fine to disagree, and more so, it's fine to disagree with a smile on your face. Just because I don't agree with what a member says. First of all, I don't assume that I'm right, but if it's my responsibility to make a decision, then I'll do that, and I'll do it comfortably with a smile. And it doesn't mean I won't agree with them the next thing that comes along. So
No, that's amazing, and there are a lot of takeaways from that. So yeah, thank you for allowing me to reflect that back to you. So another area that I was really keen to get into with you this morning was that I know that alongside your time at S, you've also been heavily involved in the World Student Games, and you've been chef de mission on a number of occasions. So for people who don't maybe know about the games, what are they, and tell us how you got involved.
yeah. Well, incidentally, and I'm not on full pedant mode here. I think they should be called the World Student Games, as they were once upon a time, because as long as you're at a certain level in the credit and qualifications framework, then you can go. But anyway, it is in fact called the World University Games. It is every 2 years. It's the second biggest multi-sport event in the world, behind the Olympics. It has a lot of things in common with how the Olympics is run. And incidentally, I'm talking about the summer games. The winter games are also available, and are ably led by my colleague Chris Purdy at this point. But the games, yeah, fabulous opportunity. 15 core sports, three optional ones every 2 years. Best part of 10,000 athletes from upwards of 150 countries worldwide. The technical requirements are very similar to the Olympics. We've seen different models around the village and so on, but effectively it's a whopper of an event, B, extremely high quality field. A lot of the time it's more difficult to win a medal at the World Uni Games than it might be at the Commonwealth Games or European Championships. So we're dealing with a pretty good sporting environment. And in the middle of that, Great Britain has taken teams pretty much, apart from Chengdu, which was a bit of a sore one. We didn't go, it was postponed in 21, and we didn't go when it was arranged in 23. But otherwise, we've got a long history of competing in the games, and I've been lucky to have a few opportunities to do that since my first crack at it in 2011.
And so what sort of size of delegation would GB normally take to, let's stick with the summer games for now?
Yeah, well, it can be highly variable for two reasons. One, the simple geography of the thing. Last summer we were in Germany, which was helpful, but more often than not, it's been much further from home, and particularly regularly in Asia. So that can have an impact. The other thing that has an impact is the decision making, which rests heavily on governing bodies, actually, Ben, to decide whether it's in their pathway, they're going to support attendance, and whether they're going to try to send their best athletes. And that's not the only factor, but it's a big factor. So all of that playing through, we've had delegations as small as 70 or 80 in recent times, and as big as, well, in Germany, I'll get around now if I don't remember the exact number, but there's about 180 of us in Germany, across 11 different sports. So that's the kind of scope that you're dealing with. And whether or not there are team sports is another thing that has a big impact on that, because you might only go with 2 or 3 taekwondo athletes, but if you end up taking a football team, as we have in the past, then that makes a difference.
Sure, and I remember when I first sort of started to understand the size and the scale of the games. I was fortunate to listen to a presentation from the organising committee, the German organising committee that had secured the games, and it was at that point that I first heard them say this is the biggest sporting event outside of the Olympics, and that I have to say that absolutely knocked me for six. But just listening to you talk there, you can totally see how it is just as well. Yeah, it's a mini Olympics, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it really is. And the way the functional areas operate and the technical requirements and the venue setup, all of that's pretty consistent. There are fewer spectators, of course, than you might find at the Olympics, but I think in Germany there were over 1 million tickets sold one way or the other throughout the event, which was superb. And of course, well broadcast as well. A lot of pickup on Eurosport traditionally. So there's and Fizu TV now as well. So it's easier to see it than it has been. Some people will joke that Sheffield are still paying for the 1991 edition, so I don't know how likely it is that it'll be coming back to the UK anytime soon. But it is a whopper of an event, and we're very much looking forward. There's some decisions to make about the team staff so I'm talking about we, not me here, but we will be looking forward to going to Chungcheong in South Korea in summer of 27. That's the next Summer Games.
And so, yeah, how did you get involved in it in the first place?
I was approached at quite short notice, which makes me think I wasn't the first phone call, to come and help team manage the football in China in 2011, and we'd made not only a late decision to go, but a late decision to go with two teams from an equality point of view, which was a good call, but the budget was only really for one team. So that was, in some ways, a fool's errand, but a brilliant fool's errand. And so I was the team leader, not the coach, but the organizer for men's and women's football going out to China in 2011. And that was wild because we've got 12 game days in a row. Usually you'd play one, rest one, but because I was with both teams, every day for 12 days in a row was game day. And the women's team had a poor tournament, I think they would agree, and all sorts of adversity and injuries and illness and red cards and everything. And the men were absolutely flying and made it to the final. So it was a classic emotional roller coaster. So when I went back in 2013 to Russia, I don't know if it's just because I was being petulant, but anyway, we had team staff for each team when we went to Russia, which was a much easier experience. And both teams did well. Perhaps that there was a lesson in there somewhere.
And so we talked specifically before about the role of that you've been the chef de mission. So again, for people that maybe aren't so au fait with that terminology, what is a chef de mission and what's your role then in the games?
Yeah, if you can edit this out if need be, Ben, but let me approach that sideways. When we were in Naples in 2019 and I was the chef de mission, we were staying on two dry docked cruise ships for the whole games because there wasn't enough hotel space in Napoli. And our tennis team had an awful travel day. They were only coming from Heathrow, but they had a terrible travel day. And in the end, only got onto the boat, which was the final bit of the journey, at something like 4:45 in the morning. And I'd stayed up to welcome them in, and I thought they'd be hungry. So I'd got a silver platter out of one of the places and got some fruit and yogurts and stuff like that. So I came down, and the team leader, Alistair, introduced me as the chef, faithfully as the chef. So then the next day, apparently the tennis players were like, that was really weird that the chef of the boat came to welcome us on. Anyway, so that's a long way of saying that the chef has got nothing to do with catering unless that's what's required. But the chef de mission's effectively the head of delegation, and so it's a voluntary role, but a responsible one because you're looking after effectively the welfare and the performance of your entire squad. You want to make sure everybody comes home again in one piece. And obviously there's a team of other support staff, admin people, docs and physios, coaches and team leaders. So the real job of the chef is just to make sure that those folk all have what they need to create a good environment. But it's, yeah, how do we give our athletes and staff the best platform to do well, and how do we look after them for 2 or 3 weeks away from home?
Yeah, so to pull on that thread then, what do you think, having led, a sizable delegation of athletes and multidisciplinary teams on the world stage, what do you, when you reflect back, what do you think are some of the characteristics that would make someone successful in that space?
The main one that springs to my mind is just being authentically yourself. I've witnessed a lot, and I'm determined not to be this guy. A lot of people step into an environment that's labeled performance, and that's now a shorthand for I've got to be ruthless, I've got to be in a hurry, I've got to be bolshy, I've got to be demanding, and we've got to win at all costs. And I just think that's a massive wrong turn. And it's just my approach. There'll be other approaches, but I've tried to be the same stew if I'm in a performance environment than I am in any other environment, and to try to give other people the comfort to do the same, and not to have to pull a mask on because we're in a certain place. And my reflection is that most people respond really well to that. Folk who are already in the habit of having a mask on, that can be quite uncomfortable for them. And of course, it's always about the blend of people. So we've all got to navigate that stuff together. But this past edition in Rhine-Ruhr, again, it might sound like I'm adopting two positions. We're really clear that we wanted to do well, but we're also really clear that that's not if you like, an end in itself. That's a result of good prep, people knowing what they need to do, people being comfortable, people being able to try and learn, and not be under enormous pressure beyond that the competition brings. And so, and actually to remember that the one thing we've all got in common is that we're human beings and we need to be supported and looked after. So that's broadly been my approach. Who knows if that's been the right thing, but it's been the right thing for me, and I'm grateful that I've been given that opportunity.
And keeping on that theme then, what do you see the value of these sorts of opportunities for students and student sport?
I think it's massive, but it's not uniform for them. So we're talking about some people who will be on the stepping stone to a professional career, or in sport, or on their way to the Olympics or whatever. So we've got to recognise that. Occasionally we've got people coming the other way. You've got swimmers who've been to the Olympics already, and so that's a mixture. And of course you've got people in athletes in much smaller sports for whom this is just an unreal, otherworldly experience that they're never going to be able to recreate. We played a women's football match in China against China, with something like 35,000 supporters in the crowd. You can't replicate that. You can't replicate being at an opening ceremony in Kazan and having the Russian cosmonauts wishing you well from the International Space Station. So you get these sort of pinch yourself moments, and the real learning and development for athletes, regardless of which category they're in, is to be able to enjoy that but not be completely consumed or distracted by it. And hopefully the experience that they get then helps them the next time they're in an unusual situation and they still have to perform. And the same is true, by the way, for all the staff. It's a magic opportunity for staff, physios, coaches, organisers, team leaders. And, I'm so grateful for the opportunity and learned loads as a result. And I'm sure all the other staff have as well.
And so, yes, it seems as if, it sounds it has very much taken you around the world, and just some of those opportunities that you've literally just sort of sprinkled a bit of dust over, but they must be, life-changing and things that you'll never forget. So how, if somebody's listening to this and thinking, I would really like a piece of that, what advice would you give them? How can they get involved?
The easy thing to do, but you'd have to be deliberate about it, is just to stay close to what Bucks are telling us all about the opportunity. And the World Unis Summer and Winter Games are, if you like, the pinnacle of that, but the same thing goes for championships at world level and all the opportunities that come through ISA. So Bucks will keep everybody informed about that, and so you should keep your antennae peeled for that. More prosaically, and especially people early in their career, I say yes a lot. If there's an opportunity there, then get stuck in. You never can be sure what everything's going to lead to, but I think if you're prepared to just have a crack at stuff early on, and trust that it'll all add up to something, then that's as good a bit of advice as I can give. There will be opportunities for recruitment, I'm sure, in the next cycle. There's winter games at the start of 2027, and then summer games will be August time. So very soon there'll be a bit of momentum behind that, and I encourage people to have a look at it.
Brilliant. And that message of saying yes and taking those opportunities early in your career is one that comes out time and time again on the podcast. So it's a really good takeaway for anybody that's listening and is maybe at the start of their career. So that wraps up first part. So we're going to move into the final section now, Stu. So just some last questions just to wrap things up. So what's the one book, podcast, resource that you've either gifted or recommended the most to somebody, and why?
Yeah, some people are so steeped in sport that they'll grab everything there. Because I work and volunteer in sport, I like to listen to stuff that's completely different, and I actually like the way that frames your thinking about stuff. So my recommendation is for a podcast called Star Talk. It's with Neil deGrasse Tyson, who pitches himself as your personal astrophysicist, and usually with a comic sidekick, Chuck Nice. So it's really good. They're talking about big stuff like space-time and black holes and quantum physics and all sorts of other stuff, but in a really relatable way. And I enjoy just getting lost in some of that stuff as a bit of perspective.
Great. Can you tell us about an experience you've had that you would never want to repeat but has profoundly changed you for the better?
I've been lucky, by the way, to not have many such experiences, and a wee trigger warning though now about suicide for anybody that might affect closely. I was effectively the first responder to a suicide in my neighbour's house about 15 years ago, and so our doorbell rang, and it was the neighbour to say that he'd found his fiancée in the hall, and it was one of these sort of weird situations where you just kick into gear, and I chose to sort of keep my wife and kids away from it and to go and respond, and I'm glad I did that. We couldn't help in any way, but the reason I find it of some ongoing value is, first of all, the perspective something like that gives you about what's actually a problem. But secondly, a kind of rumination on how instinct meets experience. I had an instinct to try to help, which I would still try to do today, but I had no experience that was to back that up. And mostly that doesn't matter. I think people should always try to help, but where it did matter was that the phone rang whilst I was in that flat. And because I was reeling a bit, I thought I should help by answering the phone, and it turned out to be the deceased's mother phoning to find out how they were. So it was a terrible decision to answer the phone, and I found myself completely ill-equipped to deal with the situation. So I sometimes reflect on all that, and sorry to have changed the tone of the podcast, but I think what I learned from all of that is that experience is what gives you sharper instincts about what you can do, and the more experienced you get in life and in work, the more you should trust your instincts. I probably over leveraged in that situation from a good place, but looking back on it now, I think the longer into your career you get, or the longer into your life you get, the more you should trust your gut, because a series of experiences are what help to keep your instinct sharp, or something like that.
Yeah, no, well, thank you for sharing that. It's a harrowing example, but the reflection of that, where insight meets experience, it's definitely something that I'm going to ruminate on from this conversation. So yeah, thank you very much for sharing that, Stu. Is there anything that you've changed your mind about recently?
Not a lot. But to some extent, the purpose and value of cats. And I'm not talking about the musical, by the way. And I might lose favour with some of the audience if I share my view about musicals. But actual cats, we now have 2 in the house. The second one was very much without my permission. And yet, they definitely add something to the domestic mix. I used to be a bit sniffy about cats because they're disinterested and manipulative and so on, but they also have charm, and they have an interesting perspective that you can tap into. So I'm slowly coming around to cats, but I would also say, if Katie is listening, that 2 is plenty. Thank you very much, and let's not become that household with more animals than humans in it.
I promise not to edit that last bit out. We'll keep that one in there for effect. Okay, last couple then. If you were starting your career again, what would you not do?
Honestly, nothing big. I couldn't say to you, I wish I hadn't done exactly that thing, but loads of little things. I would. So it's hard to answer this question without contradicting myself. I think there's loads of things that I would do differently now, but I also think it would be a mistake to have done them differently at the time, because that's how you actually learn. So I replay decisions I've made. I can remember stuff that's landed well and hasn't. I can remember contributions in meetings where I wish I'd said something else. There's millions of those. But that's all how you sharpen your spear in the first place. So I wouldn't wish those things away. And if I hadn't made those mistakes, I'd have made some other mistakes, or I'd make bigger mistakes now because I hadn't made them at the time. So my kind of glib answer is I wouldn't change a thing, Ben, but hopefully for a good reason. And that's not to say I've made good calls all the way through. It's actually to confirm that I haven't.
Brilliant. So last question then. If from next week you only had 2 hours a week to do what you normally do, where would you spend this time in order to still be successful?
I'm going to have to check that you haven't been speaking to our chairman. I think I'd try and spend as much time with people as possible, and see how much of the isolated, head down writing and stuff I could get rid of, frankly. I think it's so much richer to talk to people, especially in person, and then next best on the phone, and then on screen after that, and in email. And then the further away you get from being with somebody in person, I think the more time you're wasting. So if I only had 2 hours, I would try and be disciplined about who I was talking to, and I would chat to people as much as possible. I don't know your radio station of choice, Ben, but I'm of a certain age, so I listen to Radio 4 in the morning, and I'm always fascinated by the last 5 minutes of the show in the morning, because you think they surely can't crowbar another item in. They've got maybe 90 seconds to go, and they'll start another interview. And it's amazing to me. It's always amazing how much ground you can cover in just 1 minute. So I would try and channel that somehow, be like Amal Rajan or whatever, and try and live that way 2 hours a week.
That is absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for spending the time with us this morning, Stu. You've used the word a number of times in our conversation about richness and rich conversations, and hopefully our listeners will attest that this has been very much a rich conversation. We've covered so much in the hour, and just want to wish you all the very best with your continued work at SSS.
Thanks a lot, Ben. It's been a real treat to be on. Thanks for having me, and Keep up the great work on the podcast.